about joining the university club, you are making a dramatic mistake, because right now in my life it's kind of a nasty situation. Never, ever could I have asked for such kindness. People have called me who I don't even know from the club. I've gotten cards. Marvelous, marvelous, marvelous response. It's quite touching. So if you don't join this wonderful organization, you need to see a psychiatrist, I won't tell you. Because everyone has been so wonderful to me. Oh, by the way, go into your pocketbooks, your pockets, your totes, whatever, and turn those things off. And for the one person who it's going to go off anyway, please run fast to the back. Now, I want to take this time as we're starting the new year to thank Manuel, because without him, we wouldn't be able to see or hear or sit. So please, let's give him a big... Now, our next program is a bonus. It appears we have an extra Monday in January. So the history group is going to give you an extra speaker. And it's going to be Steve Bertha, who will present Hernando de Soto Discovers America. A lot of other people claim the same thing, but we give him credit. In this program, Steve will tell the story of a 4-year journey of 600 plus Spaniards led by De Soto through the American Southeast in search of wealthy cities to plunder. This venture gave them many surprises that should in turn surprise us today. It's a fascinating tale of discovery, tenacity, greed, and consequence, and a wonderful presenter. So remember to put your doctor's appointment in car repair on another date, and I'll save you a seat. Steve Bertha is going to join with us on a trip with De Soto. History today, Monday, January the 16th. In 1412, the de' Medici family was appointed the official banker of the papacy. In 1547, Ivan IV, the Terrible, he was only 17, crowned himself the first Tsar of Moscow. In 1865, Union Major General William T. Sherman decreed that 400,000 acres of land in the South would be divided into 40-acre lots and given to the former slaves. The order later was revoked by President Andrew Johnson, and it is believed to have inspired the expression 40 acres and a mule. I've never heard that expression, but apparently it's there. In 1868, the refrigerator car was patented by William Davis, who was a fish dealer in Detroit. In 1883, the Pendleton Act was passed, which created the U.S. Civil Service system. In 1919, the 18th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution authorized the prohibition of alcohol, and it was ratified. Fools. In 1920, the first assembly of the League of Nations was held in Paris. In 1936, the first photo finish camera was installed at Hialeah Racetrack at Hialeah, Florida. In 1938, the first jazz concert was held at Carnegie Hall, performed by Benny Goodman and his band. In 1939, the daily newspaper comic Superman debuted. In 1944, General Eisenhower took command of the Allied invasion force in London. In 1963, Khrushchev claimed to have a 100 megaton nuclear bomb. In 2001, U.S. President Bill Clinton awarded former Teddy Roosevelt posthumous Medal of Honor for his service in the Spanish-American War. In 2002, Richard Reed was indicted in Boston on federal charges alleging he tried to blow up a U.S.-bound jetliner with explosives hidden in his shoes. Reed later pleaded guilty and was sentenced to life in prison. And now you know why you take off your shoes in the airport. In 2005, a 66-year-old Romanian university lecturer became the oldest birth mother in the world. In 2020, the impeachment trial of U.S. President Donald Trump began in the Senate. In 2021, India began the vaccination of its 13 billion people for COVID-19. In 2022, unvaccinated world #1 tennis player Novak Djokovic, I think that's his name, was deported by the Australian government without playing the Australian Open, and we all know the reason. And today is the birthday of actress Ethel Merman, baseball pitcher Dizzy Dean, American racer A.J. Faught, American singer Jim Stafford, actor and creator of the Broadway show Hamilton, Lin-Manuel Miranda. And that's history today. And I'm going to turn this program over to, and this mic over to, my partner and co-chair, Dr. Ovid Vitas, who will introduce the speaker.
Thank you, Sherry, and good morning. Mark Cooper has a bachelor's degree from Indiana University. He received his JD from University of Georgia, and subsequently he practiced law here in Orlando from 1972 until he retired in 2015. He's the former chair of the Florida Bar Grievance Committee and also served in the 9th Judicial Circuit. That was one of the committees that was in charge of investigating and prosecuting ethical violations committees, the committee all run by lawyers in Orange and Osceola counties. Also, at UCF, Mark has taught classes in contract law and legal ethics. For the past many years, we have been privileged to have Mark as a guest speaker for our history group. He gave presentations on such subjects as Thurgood Marshall, the unsung heroes of the civil rights movement, Leopold and Loeb, the Monkey Trial, and W.E.B. Du Bois. And a year ago, we heard a presentation about eugenics in this country. Today's presentation is titled Eugenics in America, Chapter 2. Mark will summarize an earlier one and address whether eugenics is still practiced in America. So on behalf of the history group, it gives me great pleasure to present to you our fellow club member, Mark Cooper. Mark?
Thank you very much. Can you hear me in the back? Raise some hands. Okay, thank you. Last year, I gave a presentation on eugenics in America. I hope that most of you were able to attend, but for those of you who did not, or for those of you who, like me, have a shortened memory span, I will briefly summarize my earlier presentation and then bring it up to date so that we can try to determine whether, in fact, if not in law, eugenics is still in practice in our country today. With a little bit of luck, this will work. Then again, you know, it always works before you get here, and then as soon as you get here, the system goes haywire. There we go. Eugenics has been defined by its supporters as the improvement of the human race by better breeding, or in the language of some of its supporters, it would prevent native morons from continuing to breed. The theory was generally accepted as science in this country from the 1880s through the end of World War II, when America realized that this was pseudoscience and it had served as the justification for the Nazi program that we now know as the Holocaust. So the initial question is, how is it that this theory came to America? The theory of eugenics had several fathers, but the theory was first posited by Plato. And he suggested selective breeding. Most historians say, though, that the modern theory, oh, come on. Manuel, where are you when I need you? Got it, never mind. The modern theory came from Scotland, from a man named Sir Francis Galton. Sir Francis was a cousin of Charles Darwin, and he applied Darwin's theory of natural selection to the human species. It seemed to him, God, I'm sorry for this. Okay, Manuel, I still need you. Okay. It seemed to Galton, it seemed to logically follow that if you could breed plants to develop a better apple or a better orange, then animals could be bred to develop a better breed of cattle, and the same principle should apply to the human animal. In 1921, there was an international eugenics conference held in New York, and it was endorsed by the Roman Catholic Bishop of New York, although the church opposed sterilizations. Okay, thank you. One of the earliest supporters of eugenics was Alexander Graham Bell. Bell had posited that deafness was an inheritable trait, and he presented a paper on that subject to the National Academy of Science in 1883. Alexander Graham Bell's main hobby was breeding cattle. And because of this hobby, he was actively involved in organizations that were dedicated to the improvement of breeded cattle, if there's such a word as that. If cattle could be improved by careful breeding, then Bell theorized that the same principle should apply to people. Bell, whose scientific reputation had already been established, presented his theory to the American Breeders Association, and it soon became an avid supporter of the application of eugenic theory to people. Support for this theory spread the country and became a national and international obsession. What you see here is a picture from a meeting in Topeka, Kansas, It's undated, but it's an example of the fact that in large and small communities throughout this country, eugenics became so popular that it was presented at county fairs and all sorts of other opportunities. Check this, if you will. There are times when saving a life is a greater crime than taking one. Think about that for a second. It became a subject of popular magazines. This magazine, and I'm sorry that it's undated and I haven't been able to determine the year of publication, but look at, if you will, at this this article that was dealt with in the magazine. At its inception, eugenics was supported by many of the most famous progressives of that time as a way to protect the society from the evils, you can count them, crime, drunkenness, poverty, severe illness, mental illness, mental retardation, physical disability, and sexual behavior which was not socially acceptable then, such as promiscuity or same-sex relations. All of these traits or characteristics were included within the term feeble-mindedness. So if you or anyone you knew had any of those actions, they were considered to be feeble-minded. It was very popular at the time to recognize that it was science that supported the proposition that feeble-mindedness was inherited from one generation to the next generation. Now, initially, in order to prevent the procreation by the feeble-minded, private charities and religious organizations operated what were called homes, but where the feeble-minded were involuntarily institutionalized during the years when they could procreate. As the eugenics movement took hold, though, and became more recognized and popular, it became clear that the cost of incarceration was increasing dramatically, and the cost to private organizations became prohibitive. The public sector had to take on the role of protecting the American bloodline by preventing the procreation of the feeble-minded. In order to decrease the cost to the public, it was decided that rather than incarcerating people for years, sterilization would be both effective and beneficial to the society. The cost of the procedure was not significant, and the period of incarceration and the cost related to it could be dramatically reduced. So leading progressives of the time fully endorsed this policy, believing that it would result in the reduction and eventual elimination of the evils of society passed from one generation to the next. Included in the people who supported this eugenic theory, obviously, number one was Alexander Graham Bell, but there were many others who may shock you. Dr. John Harvey Kellogg is known to you at least by his name because he and his brother established the Kellogg Company and the Kellogg cereals that we eat. What you may not know is that at the period of time in the turn of the century, he was extremely well-known and highly respected within not just the medical community, but the general community as well. He didn't like the idea of racial thoroughbreds, and he called for the sterilization of defectives. Who knows who this is? Shout it out. Margaret Sanger. Margaret Sanger was the founder of Planned Parenthood. But here is her position with respect to eugenics. A number of years ago, I gave a talk about W.E.B. Du Bois, who was recognized as one of the intellectual leaders in the civil rights movement. I hope you were here for that, but if you were not, I'll summarize his position quickly. He believed that the future of the black race in America would be determined by the inbreeding of what he called the talented tenth, the top 10% of the black community by intellect or by whatever scale he used, which he never clearly defined. By breeding those people together, they would increase the benefit of the entire race. That's eugenics. The great reformer, Teddy Roosevelt, says enough. Anybody know who this is? Clarence Darrow. Clarence Darrow was recognized as the leading progressive, even radical lawyer of the time. Supported the working man, the working people, but didn't have much mercy for those who were within the group called feeble-minded. Helen Keller. Helen Keller, who was deaf and blind, allowing a defective child to die was simply a weeding of the human garden that shows a sincere love of true life. It's shocking, at least today. And how about Winston Churchill? Now, he said this well before he was Prime Minister of Great Britain, but look at his language. And finally, there was David Starr Jordan, who was then the president of my alma mater, Indiana University, and later became the president of Stanford University. He was a leader of the movement. And parenthetically, I'd like you to note that within the last 12 months, Indiana University and Bloomington, Indiana, where the main campus is located, have removed any reference to Jordan. They have renamed buildings, they have renamed streets, so that apparently as a part of that movement to try to erase this portion of history. Even the Supreme Court of the United States got involved in it. One of the things that I talked about a lot last time was a 1927 decision by the United States Supreme Court. And what I'm going to give you now is a quote from the court's decision. "It is better for all the world if instead of waiting to execute degenerate offspring for crime or let them starve for their imbecility, society can prevent those who are manifestly unfit for continuing their kind. 3 generations of imbeciles are enough." Close quote. For those of you who are lawyers, the case was Buck versus Bell, and if you want the citation, I can give it to you afterwards. This decision and the words I just read to you were written by Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes, Jr., one of the giants of American jurisprudence. And that case has never been reversed. It's not been enforced either, but it's never been reversed. From 1907 to 1932, 32 states passed laws permitting the sterilization of the feeble-minded. Now, if you look at this is a map from 1935, and the states that have the horizontal lines, or the whatever you call those lines. Those are states that already had legislation permitting sterilization. The states that are in black represented states where legislation was then pending before their legislative body. And there are only a few states, interestingly enough, Florida was one of them, who did not have any laws on the books in 1935 for forced sterilization. I've studied this map to try to come up with some logic, some reason why some of these states did what they did. If you think in terms of contemporary politics, which may be a mistake, some of the most liberal states, California, had greatly sophisticated and enforced its eugenics laws. The Midwest, which we now think of as being pretty solidly conservative, had eugenics laws on the books. And the East Coast and New England, by and large, had eugenics laws on the books. In most of these states, the procedure, sterilization, could be performed without the consent or knowledge of the patient or the parents or guardian of the patient. Forced sterilization. Today, we all consider that to be pretty shocking. But it is important to note that however offended we may be by all of this, the early advocates for eugenics were not monsters playing parts in a morality play involving a clash between evil and good. On the contrary, they shared the belief that government could play a part in explaining and solving the problems of the world through science. Remember that eugenics was, at that time, accepted science, and it was endorsed by the leading scientists and academics at that time. It was only as public awareness of the atrocities of the Nazis committed in the name of eugenics increased that most Americans rejected the pseudoscience, and the public support of it in this country decreased sharply. You would assume from that the number of involuntary sterilizations would decrease accordingly. But if you assume that, you would be wrong. Throughout the 1940s, the 1950s, and the 1960s, after the repeal of laws regarding sterilization, the sterilization without the knowledge or consent of women of color in the Deep South became so common that it was referred to as the Mississippi appendectomy. I hope some of you recall a presentation that I gave a number of years ago here about the unsung heroines of the civil rights movement. One of those heroines was Fannie Lou Hamer. Fannie Lou was one of the founders of the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party. And in testimony that she gave before Congress, she made a statement which has become famous. She said, "I am sick and tired of being sick and tired." In 1961, when most of our states had already repealed their sterilization laws, Fannie Lou Hamer had surgery to remove a tumor in her abdomen. Unrelated to the tumor, and without her knowledge or consent, the white surgeon sterilized her. This surgery, and many like it, was justified as a way to decrease the dependent and minority population, using the same idea that the eugenicists used, but without having the legal support that the eugenicists had. In other words, eugenics was continuing notwithstanding the repeal of the laws which permitted it. Surely you would think that as a result of this, the invasion of women's bodies was stopped. But it wasn't. By the 1970s, the federal government was funneling money into county family planning programs, especially in the South. A historian at the University of Michigan wrote the following, quote, "These facilities were twisted by racial and eugenic logic and pre-existing, long-standing racism and the disempowerment of black mothers and black girls," end quote. Minnie Lee Ralph, to the left, was 2 years older than her baby sister, Mary Alice Ralph. The girls were the youngest of 6 children living with their parents in Montgomery, Alabama. The family was poor, both parents were completely illiterate, and the girl's father had been permanently disabled as a result of an automobile accident. The family home was literally a cardboard shack with no running water or electricity until the Montgomery Community Association relocated the Ralphs in 1971 in public housing. 1971, we all remember that. Among other activities, the Montgomery Community Association ran a family planning clinic which received federal money under the auspices of the Office of Economic Opportunity. Although initially the Office of Economic Opportunity, had regulations which prohibited the use of federal funds for surgical procedures designed to result in sterilization, that prohibition ended in 1971. For reasons that are unclear, in 1971, the federal government turned around and said that federal funds could be used for sterilization purposes by organizations such as the Montgomery Community Association. In 1973, a social worker for the Montgomery Community Association noticed a number of young boys who were hanging around the girls. The girls at that time were aged 14 and 12. Both of them had been labeled as intellectually inferior. And although there was nothing to indicate that either girl was sexually active, a nurse from the family planning clinic took the girls to the clinic to get hormone shots. In fact, what they received was Depo-Provera, a synthetic hormone also known as progesterone, which could stop pregnancies up to 3 months. At the time this drug was being administered through the use of federal funds, it had not yet been approved by the FDA, and it was known to have serious side effects, including sometimes a near suicidal depression. Ultimately, the FDA denied approval of the drug because of its link to cancer in animals. But the girls had received these injections long before then. The girl's mother, who again was completely illiterate, signed an X to what she thought was consent to a different kind of shot. In fact, instead of the shots, both girls were surgically sterilized. When the girl's father saw the scars on his daughters and he discovered what had really happened, he went to the Southern Poverty Law Center for help, a public interest civil rights related law firm operating out of Montgomery. The law center filed a class action lawsuit on behalf of the girls, the National Welfare Rights Organization and its 125,000 members, and all persons subjected to involuntary sterilizations under agencies funded by the federal government. The findings of the court in this class action are astounding. These are the girls as adults, the women. And again, they did appear to be intellectually challenged. There's no question about that. But they were sterilized without their knowledge or consent. In a 1974 decision by the United States District Court for the District of Columbia, in a case which is reported as a matter of record, has never been appealed, and has never been overturned, the judge made some findings of fact. I'm going to give you a lengthy quote, but the words I'm giving you are not mine, they were the judge's. And again, this was written in 1974. Over the last few years, an estimated 100,000 to 150,000 low-income persons have been sterilized annually under federally funded programs. Quote continues, "There is uncontroverted evidence in the record that minors and other incompetents have been sterilized with federal funds, and that an indefinite number of poor people have been improperly coerced into accepting a sterilization operation under the threat that various federally funded welfare programs would be withdrawn from them unless they submitted to irreversible sterilization." Close quote. As a result, the court found that federal funds were being used to deny what the judge said was the constitutionally protected right to procreate. And the court barred the use of federal funds for involuntary sterilization. The government did not appeal this decision, and the ruling of the court was final. Note that one of the things that the judge said at the very beginning was that there was uncontroverted evidence with respect to his findings. That means that nobody objected to what he was saying, as a matter of fact. Nobody offered any other possible facts as an explanation or as a justification. And so he found that no one denied the truth of any of the things that he said in his final judgment, which to this day remains the law of the land. The Ralph case was decided 48 years ago. Surely involuntary sterilization has now got to be a thing of the past, but it is not. In 2013, the Center for Investigative Reporting confirmed that physicians working for the California Department of Corrections had sterilized approximately 150 female inmates without their consent. This was in 2013. These women were members of the various groups that the prison staff thought would be likely to return to prison. I'm going to give you a statistic now that almost knocked me off my chair. The records of the state of California show that between 1997 and 2010, the state of California paid physicians $147,460 to perform involuntary sterilizations on inmates. In 2017, a judge was reprimanded for promising reduced sentences to prisoners who agreed to sterilization. And in 2020, a whistleblower reported that doctors at an Immigration and Customs Enforcement Center, ICE, we see all of those photographs on television. At an ICE center in Georgia, doctors were performing unnecessary hysterectomies on undocumented women who did not consent or have knowledge of the procedures. virtually nobody talks about eugenics anymore. The science behind the notion that the ills identified by the eugenicists are inherited has been thoroughly debunked. Yet, eugenic practices continue, just under a different name. I don't know whether this is a result of ignorance, or racism, or white nationalism, or some other alleged science. But the fact remains that some people in this country are being denied the right to have children, a right which in 1974 a United States federal judge called constitutionally protected. I ask you, is this what we want? And if not, what are we going to do about it? I thank you for your attention, and I'll be happy to answer questions.
Any questions? Mark, thank you, thank you, thank you. As always, a star. Questions from the audience?
Yes. Question here.
Wouldn't doctors who perform this be violating their own code of ethics?
Well, that's a very good question. I would think so. However, there are studies which have indicated, and I know there are a lot of physicians in the audience, so you may be able to confirm this or deny it by your own experience. But there have been a number of surveys and studies shown that during training, when physicians-to-be were required to perform a certain number of surgical procedures in order to get their degree and become fully licensed, that there were many cases where these surgeons, predominantly white, performed